this is Christina Barr. You're watching Black Tea News. Hello, hello. Welcome to Black Tea News. I'm your host, Christina Barr, and today we're going to be talking about my new book. Of course, God is Blatantly Against Abortion, which I have a copy right here in front of me today. So this is what it looks like. My youngest sister actually did the art here for me. It looks beautiful. This illustration with the hand of God reaching out to this little baby hand. Just a really, really fabulous job. And so I want to talk about why I wrote this book, how it was really a big labor of love, the mission for it, the goal of it. Thank you to people dropping in live. Thank you, Mimi, and folks soon to come. So what's the purpose of the book, how I got started on it, and what I hope to accomplish with it. And obviously people reject any sort of Christian worldview when they're talking about this topic normally, especially if they're not Christian, which I do not argue normally and suggest to people that they argue from that point of authority, because if people don't subscribe to it, then they're not going to appreciate or respect it, right? So I think it's still important to have these talking points or to know all these things that I put into the book, because even though would say things that are pretty secular, it wouldn't matter. People would presume, or people would say, oh, you have that opinion because of religion, etc. People even say this to atheists. So if you are a Christian, I really don't think you should say, I am against abortion because I am Catholic or something. And you might be saying that because in your perception, you're like, well, my Catholic values are X, Y, and Z. So that explains it. But they're just hearing that you're like a religious nutcase sycophant or whatever. But if you're going to go that route, you need to be able to describe and say, hey, my beliefs are this, and this is, we all argue for our beliefs, and these are the particular things. So this is why I'm standing up for this particular worldview, and let's debate that instead. So the book goes through a lot of different things. Thank you very much for the congratulations on the book. Big labor of love, but it is my 16th book, so that's very exciting. I'm about to have 17 on the way as well with one of my nonfiction, one of my fiction books. So I love writing, is what I love to do. It's funny, when I was a kid, would have never thought that I'd be really writing this much, especially not writing this much like nonfiction stuff. But it's really important. So I hope you guys consider getting it. It is available on Amazon right now in ebook. There was like a mix up or an error issue with Amazon. So if you did pre-order it before you should have gotten an email that said that it was canceled. You can go get it now. It is available right now in ebook. So you guys can go to Amazon and get it on ebook. You can get it in paperback as well. You can also get a paperback right now on Barnes & Noble. If you want an ebook version of it, it won't be available until Friday. But you can still pre-order it on Barnes & Noble. So that stuff is set. So those are like the two main platforms. I'm going to continue going wide with it. This is the first book that I've had that's gone wide. Before, all my other things are just available on Amazon. So the first time, I guess you can technically maybe get stuff on Barnes & Noble, but it's not quite the same thing. So this is a new process for me. So I'm very excited about it. And I hope it really blesses people and touches people. So before I jump in everything, this isn't like a typical like episode of Black Tea News. I'm not going to really talk about the news of the day. I am going to show different clips of politicians talking about this issue to say why I think it's important that we still talk about this stuff and different objections. So I have some clips from like Stacey Abrams and a congresswoman from my state, etc. And some of these things we've talked about and gone through before, but these are really good examples that I thought I could point toward. So that's why we're doing that today. So I'm not talking about, whatever is going on. This is going to be the focus here today. We can resume as business as normal tomorrow. But I really, really do encourage you guys to go to blackteennews.com because there are a lot of articles and stuff that I've written over time about this stuff. You guys can check out different merch. If you like what I do here, please consider leaving a donation at blackteennews.com/donate. But also, please consider buying a book today. That does really help when people go and they buy for obvious reasons, but also helps with like ranking and other stuff and other eyeballs to get on it. So if you got the money in your pocket, I'd appreciate it if you went and you bought it today. And the faster you buy it, the faster it'll get to you, and the faster you can read through it. So and if you enjoy it, please go ahead and leave a review on Barnes and Nobles and Amazon, etc. So let's jump into it. So why, first of all, why this approach? Why this book? That the title when I post this, there's automatically like people come gunning for it, and there's a particular narrative that people jump out at and say, oh, well, God killed X, Y, and Z, God did this, etc., which is addressed in the book. But first and foremost, why this direct with the, of course, God is blatantly against abortion, when so many people would debate about this, and so many people want to stick to just a secular sort of argument. So the first platform with my social media, I guess I had my website first, and then I did my Facebook page, but then my sisters were like saying, get on TikTok, get on TikTok, get on TikTok. So it took a while, but I eventually got on TikTok, and I started doing very well on TikTok. So I started doing videos on everything, really, but everything like political minded. I wasn't like doing makeup tutorials and stuff like that. But if I did something on abortion, and I said, hey, we got to keep it, very concise, and I'm like, life starts at conception. Therefore, that's when our right to life, we should protect life right there. It's the most consistent standard. And that's really the argument. It's really that simple. And people try to make it not simple and add a bunch of things into it and stuff. It's really, really that simple. And so I would just say those things, and it wouldn't matter. Absolutely wouldn't matter. I go do debates and other things like that. I'd make videos, and then someone would say something along the lines of, hey, don't you know that life starts at first breath? That's what your Bible says. Or someone would say, hey, don't you know that there's an abortion potion in the Bible? And they're referencing like Genesis 2:7 with the life starts at first breath. And they're referencing Numbers 5 and 11 through the rest of the chapter when they say there's an abortion potion. And they say all these things that weren't true. They'd say in Exodus, God says, there's value, or you pay a fine if a woman is injured, but not if a baby dies or something. There's miscarriage. So how people read into that particular verse, I don't even understand how they get the perception that they have, but I covered it in the book. But at first I was just replying to people and just correcting the record about different scriptures and stuff that people would say. So it kept going back and forth. So I got really sick of like just repeating the same things over and over again. So I decided to write like an entire article about it. Obviously the article doesn't cover everything, but it's on my website, blackteennews.com. And it says, of course, the Bible is against abortion. That's the title of the article. So I put that on the website. Also got sick of people saying it's really not your business. It doesn't matter if someone else has an abortion. It doesn't affect you. So I totally rejected that idea, not just because of, taxpayer dollars being spent on abortions and stuff like that, or that they're really trying to make it so that everyone accepts it and it kind of celebrates it and even subsidizes it. I made this shirt for that occasion. Like people kept saying, it's none of your business. I said, well, my money, my business. I do think it's, partly my business, especially if taxpayer dollars are involved, but it goes beyond that. So I wrote an article about the societal harm of abortion. And so, but then I started to see people say things like, if I said like, life is valuable or something, and they're like, well, is that if you think life is all intrinsically valuable, is that a religious opinion? And I'm like, only religious people believe that life is intrinsically or should be intrinsically valuable. I'm like, okay, I'll take that W. I think that's a win for God. But I see so many people debate, especially on apps like TikTok, where they'd say, if someone said abortion is wrong, people would say, well, you can't say it's wrong. That's an opinion. That's a moral opinion. And morality is subjective. And then we'd say, well, do you think like the Holocaust was wrong? And then they'd twist themselves into a pencil, be like, well, they just thought they were doing the right thing. I'm like, bro, if you can't say like that is objectively wrong to, to kill people and torture them in this sort of manner, um, I think we have a problem there. So, as the election went on, the midterms went on last year in Michigan. A lot was at stake in Michigan, and unfortunately, you guys obviously know that we got trounced, in the election. But I started writing this book, and I really, really wanted it to be done before the election was over. But I was so busy working like on the actual election and doing stuff. And trying to stop Prop 3 that I just didn't have the time to finish it in that way. And then since then, after the election was over, I added more stuff to it anyway. So yeah, I guess it all worked out how it was going to work out anyway. But it did like really upset me though, that as I was trying to tell people about why this shouldn't pass, which I knew it was going to pass if people just went to the ballot and read it as is and didn't have all the context of what the whole proposal said, because not everything was on the ballot. I'm like, if people are going to vote for it, it's going to pass if people don't have knowledge going in, and it did pass. But as I was trying to get the word out, like I talked to one Christian station and a gospel station rather, and I'm like, well, I want to put out these ads for Prop 3, and I got a call back, and they're like, well, this is like pro-choice, right? And I'm like, what do you mean? And they said, well, we're not for abortion, like we don't like it, but we, respect that a woman's right to choose. And so I'm a little taken aback by it. Not that I'm totally surprised that there are Christians who are pro-choice, because I've done a lot of videos, or a couple of videos that have gone semi-viral or viral, whatever, on this topic. So I'm not surprised that there's people who say that they're Christian and they're pro-choice. There's a lot of people out there who feel that way, but the fact that they felt like that they should call me and just let me know what their audience thought about that, I thought was really sad. So I'm like, no, this is the audience I'm sure that I want to reach. So they played my ads and stuff, but obviously didn't work out the way that I wanted it to with the election. So, this really became a need, I think, in, the body of Christ in general, because there's a lot of people who just have the wackest reasons for not being pro-life, really, and like the woman's body, woman's choice is probably the wackest, and we'll get to that. But so I try to think of everything that I had heard people say, debated throughout all this time of me being active and having conversations with people, saying that life starts at first breath, the abortion potion, and God killed his kid, why can't we kill our kid? And just all kinds of stuff that people would say. People, I put in things about objective morality and intrinsic value and separation of church and state. I put in so much in this book, so it covers a lot, including the exceptions that people tend to have. Like they'll say I'm pro-life except for cases of sexual assault and illness, or life of the mother, which, I do believe in like life of the mother. But I think, and I did address, I think most people who say life of the mother mean that they want you to save the mother's life, but just they just don't believe that there's a deliberate reason to kill the baby. But if the child does die, there's like a different ethic of you deliberately doing it versus maybe you had to induce them early or something like that and they didn't survive. Like they see it differently. I think it would be best if people just conceded the argument, because it rarely ever happens. So I think you should just concede the argument. So I do make that case in the book. So that's how it all came to be, because even if I did keep everything secular with my arguments, people, again, they bring up religion and then they butcher it. And then there's a lot of people who are Christian who are like, well, I'm Christian, but, and I'm like, we gotta address that. So, again, it became really an important need, I thought, today. So that's why I made it. And so, I'm just going to go through like a couple of things about it, what's in the book. And then I'm going to address a couple of, videos and stuff. So, or maybe I should address some of these videos that I have first. I think I'll do that first. So there's a video some time ago after Roe v. Wade. there was a video with this social media influencer, supposed to be Christian, I think, Emmanuel Aiko, the uncomfortable conversation. And we talked about this at the time when it came out. And we talked about this. I wrote an article, a pretty long article about it. But I was really disgusted with this video because it, there was no really consideration of what God would have wanted. There was really no consideration for compassion for the children. It was all about, and I can sympathize with these women and what they've gone through, their feelings and emotion. It was all about them and not about everyone else. Even when they had conversations about their partners, it was in relation to how their partner did or didn't support them. So it was just really wild to me. So I did mention this in the book a bit, but so I'm going to go ahead and share a section of this. This is with the Olympic gold medalist who had an abortion right before the Beijing Olympics. And so I will interject and share my thoughts about this and go through some other videos as well. And then I'll get into what specific things are actually like in the book, kind of chapter by chapter. So yeah.
Is your daily practice?
So I'm a pelvic floor therapist.
I think of like their wedding day and, you know, have all these different kinds of dreams. But from the age of 9, the one sole dream that always felt very real to me was becoming an Olympic champion. For me, in that moment, when I found out I was pregnant, right before I left for Beijing, I felt like I was in an impossible situation because I knew I was with my forever. I was with my soon-to-be husband. I knew I wanted to have a family with him. But I also wanted to be an Olympic champion more than anything. The day before I left for Beijing, I had an abortion. And as a woman who also identifies as a Christian woman, who tries to be Christ-like, I never, ever thought that I would be in that situation. It still is really hard for me to talk about it, but I am grateful, however, that I had the choice. I am grateful that I had the choice because although it was very, very hard for me, and I think it was a big part of why I didn't win gold because I didn't think I deserved it. Wow. So the one race I lost, the Olympic final, was the race I wanted the most. When I lined up, I didn't feel deserving of being Olympic.
Why didn't you feel like you deserved it?
Because I had just done the one thing I thought I'd never do. And I feel like good things come from God, and I didn't deserve that. Can you imagine standing on the start line, on the precipice of achieving your lifelong dream, and you know what you just did 2 weeks ago? It was awful. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. I don't know what my life would have been like had I given up this dream that I had my whole life. I don't know if I would have been all of who I am today. Would I still have shown up in the world the way I do now?
So then would you say or submit in the figurative sense your abortion also saved your life?
Yeah.
Okay, so I thought that last line, that question, would you submit in a figurative sense that the abortion saved your life? And she said yes. So I thought, what an egregious answer, and I thought, what an egregious thing for someone to ask. So what I found, so many things puzzling, and I do want to say that my intention for making this book is not to condemn women. I do believe in redemption over condemnation, and there's sections of the book that really take that into consideration. But abortion is an evil thing, and I think it's important to say that. And so the one thing that really bothered me in this conversation, there was nobody who was pro-life, no one arguing the pro-life side, but there's no one calling for women to repentance or anything like that. It was, this is what happened. We're glad that we were able to do this. And you can see that they obviously had grief about it, but she just said it saved her life. Not literally. It wasn't something that she needed to do. But she had a dream that she wanted to fulfill. So when people say that abortion is child sacrifice, did she not just sacrifice her child for her dream? I know that's really harsh language, but that is the reality of what happened. And I just hate so much that he asked that question, that could even form in his head. But she said she identifies as a Christian. And she said that she would have never imagined herself to be in that position, and that she was with her forever. So I'm like, how could you not imagine yourself to be in that position if you were sleeping around with your boyfriend? Like that. So that puzzles me. When the Bible talks about sexual immorality and different things, it's not because God is so mean and he wanted to just restrict everyone and he was throwing darts in heaven and it just landed on a couple different rules to just agonize humanity. That's not what it is. God doesn't issue purposeless commandments. And if she had brought her flesh under subjugation or submission, whatever, and they weren't sleeping around like that, don't male athletes, don't they tell them to not like do stuff right before like events and stuff? So anyway, so she had an abortion right before she went to the Beijing Olympics because the man that she wanted to marry, she was carrying his child. So but she decided to put that dream that she had first. So there's so many things so wrong with all that happened. And again, there was like really no repentance in this entire video. So it was so weird. Like there's quite a few comments that said they were disappointed in the conversation because it was really weak and it was one-sided, and like nobody pushed back like on it at all. But I do make the case in this book that abortion is not even something that, if you are a Christian, that really should be something that's within your nature to do. Like example, she wouldn't have been in that situation if she hadn't been having premarital sex with her boyfriend. And then I can understand it'd be very hard to put something that you want on the line, but a lot of our religion is about self-sacrifice. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's not about you. It's about, God, giving our all to him. So the question shouldn't have been so much about what all they wanted. It should have been, what do you think God wants? So, gosh, that video, that whole in the whole 20-something minute video, like no call to repentance or anything. So, do I think an audiobook will be available in the future? Thank you for the question. Yes. It's not recorded yet though. But yes, that's something that I want to do, for sure. Okay. I'm going to play another video as well. So, this video I've played before and I've written an article and stuff about, but, this is with, Hillary Slotkin or something. She just won in the midterm election. She took over Peter Meyer's spot. Peter Myers lost in the primary, and then John Gibbs was the Republican candidate, and she ended up beating him. So now she's a congressperson over there from the west side of the state. And so the context of this, by the way, she's on the floor giving a speech, and she's voting against a bill. Okay, she's voting against a bill, and did vote against a bill that was like, you have to supply medical care to a baby who survives abortion. That's the context. That is the context of this. Just remember that as this plays.
Of parental and maternal rights and in opposition to H.R. 26. I'm the first mother in history to represent West Michigan in Congress. This matter is deeply personal to me. I recently shared publicly about my own experience navigating a complex miscarriage and the loss of my daughter. As a pro-choice Christian who chose life, this issue is so personal to me. My faith informs my actions, but it doesn't dictate the policy of an entire nation. And further, when I read the scripture, I turn to passages and I'm guided by passages like Jeremiah 1 verses 5, which states, I knew you before I formed you and I placed you in your mother's womb. It doesn't say the government's womb or the speaker's womb. It says the mother's womb. I believe life is precious, but I reject the idea that if I embrace the sanctity of life, I also must be forced to invite the federal government in to regulate it. We must protect families from unnecessary government intrusion into the most sacred and personal decisions of our lives and our children's lives. Thank you.
Gentlelady's right.
So, first of all, given the context that I just explained, that this was about a bill that was like, if the children survived the abortion, giving them medical care. So her spouting off Jeremiah 1:5, saying, I knew your mother's womb, it's not the government's womb. What does the mother's womb matter when the baby has survived? Like, I feel if you survive an abortion, I feel like you should get health care for life. Somebody should take you to Disney World. Like, bro, you made it. You survived. Someone was out to get you and you lived. All right. The ultimate screw you. And y'all won't even say, hey, we should give them medical care. So why did all these Democrats, there's only one that like didn't vote against it, right? So why did all these people vote against it? Now, I do mention this particular moment in the book, and I also do mention Obama in the book, because back in the day when he was in the Senate in Illinois, they had a similar bill, and so he spoke up against it in opposition for it. And so he said, well, he believed, one, that doctors you don't have to tell them to save the patient or whatever, that they'll just do that. And I wouldn't think so. I mean, you'd like to think so, but you also have to remember there are also people like Kermit Gosnell. If you don't know who Kermit Gosnell is, he's one of the most disgusting serial killers in our history, I guess. But he would he'd have these very late term pregnancy women come in his clinic, abortion clinic, and he would induce their labor, and then he would snip the spines of the babies. And that was just how they operated. And people would send them to his clinic for them to do that. So he was actually, he did it a lot, but he was convicted for, I think maybe 6 counts of murder, if not 7. If you go, there was actually a movie, the Gosnell movie. Dean Cain was in it. I can't think of the name of any other actors. Some of them I recognize, but I can think of their faces, but I can't think of anyone else's names. But Dean Cain was in the film. And you can go to Gosnell movie and still find on their website a picture of baby boy A, that he was a real life picture of baby boy A, who Gosnell was convicted for. And so there was a nurse who took a picture of the baby and that's how they had evidence. And the baby was so big, I guess it just startled her that she just, took a photo of the baby. But he was joking like, oh, this baby's big enough to walk me to the bus stop or something. So there are people out there who are horribly evil, and we like to think the best of people in general, but particularly our physicians. But some people don't have the best interest of heart. So saying the baby that they did just try to kill, saying that yes, if they survive, then provide them medical care, I don't think that's a terrible thing. But Obama said, his suspicion was that the purpose of the bill was to burden the original intention. So the reason why they want a bill to save the babies if they survive the abortion is to make the doctors and the mothers feel bad and maybe like convict them into not having the abortion or doing what they're doing. Because if there's someone who can survive the abortion, that means that did you not just attempt to kill them? So I guess I think saving them is part of it. I would agree that convicting people emotionally is probably also the goal. But that's why people like this congressperson was like saying stuff about, oh, mother's womb, woman's choice, in a situation where the baby's already been born. So let's remember that narrative. So second thing though, her using Jeremiah 1:5 is really dirty because that's like one of the number one scriptures that people quote to say, for like the pro-life movement that, I formed you I knew you before I formed you in your mother's womb. And so some translations just say the womb, but there's some that say the mother's womb. And so her thing is, it's the mother's womb. It's not the government's womb. It's not their business. And we can't legislate morality here within the woman's womb. Right. So, that's what she says, right? But we'll take it from a spiritual point, and then we'll go into the law for a second, or what should be the law. So the point of that scripture is to not say that the mother has some kind of dominant relationship in that circumstance. It's not to say that the mother has that special relationship for the child because he's in her womb, therefore she gets to decide his life and death or her life and death. That's not the purpose of that scripture. That purpose of that scripture is to say that God is the one who formed that child and knew that child and has a relationship with that child. So just like he knew that mother when she was in her mother's womb, and has a relationship and goals and dreams and all sorts of plans and stuff for that woman outside of the womb, he has that same relationship with that child. So it's really not about the mother. That's Jeremiah 1:5 is about God and that relationship with that individual. So yeah, really, really dirty using Jeremiah 1:5 for her purposes right there. So really, really messed up. But the other thing I want to note is people say like, oh, it's not the government's job there to legislate this stuff. Well, let me show this next clip because this will go into it too. This is Reverend Warnock, who's a senator right now. And so this is from his debate, not from the one where he had with the last election with the football player, can't think of his name, but the other one before.
Reverend, please respond to the abortion issue in particular.
Well, listen, I have a profound reverence for life and an abiding respect for choice. The question is, whose decision is it? And I happen to think that a patient's room is too small a place for a woman, her doctor, and the U.S. government. I think that's too many people in the room. But those who are concerned about life, and I certainly am, ought to be focused on the incredibly high rates of infant mortality and maternal mortality in our country when compared to other developed nations. That's something the government could work on, and I've been working on it my entire career.
Greg Bluestein.
Senator.
So this idea that he's repeated that line. He said it on Twitter and other places that the doctor's room is too small for the woman and the government, right? So the couple things, the baby's obviously in there, right? So it's not just the woman and not a decision between, it is a decision between the woman and her doctor because that's all that's kind of relevant in the law and stuff, but still gonna be the baby there. I can't have serious conversations with people about abortion and they don't at least acknowledge that the baby's there and alive and human, etc. So there's at least the baby there. There's also the father who's there somewhere, right? That is his progeny. It really breaks my heart that if men grieve their children and don't like abortion, that they're, I don't know, seen as controlling and misogynist. I've seen people say such awful things to fathers grieving the butchering of their sons and daughters. Really, really unfortunate that our society is like that. So there's a father, but there's someone really, really important though, that the Reverend should be acknowledging is also there, in the equation, right? Is God not there, Reverend? So, is God not there, Reverend? So why aren't you telling people to choose life and choose life more abundantly? Why is there such this push there? Because Warnock and Abrams and a bunch of other people won't even say that they're against abortion in the final month. The people say, well, no one has abortions that late. So why aren't people okay with banning them very late? But we do have very late term abortions in the country. People say they're just for medical reasons, which actually is not true. And there's studies and other stuff in the book as well. So that's just a narrative. People do have abortions late term. Not that I think they're bad at any stage, just to be frank, but people do have late term abortions for financial reasons, for relationship reasons, a lot of reasons that people have them early. People will have them later. It's not like people just have it in their heads that women just wouldn't do that. And if they did, it's some kind of medical emergency. And when they say medical emergency, they mean like maybe the child has like Down syndrome or something like that. They don't mean that because if you are having a medical emergency, it takes in your late term, the safest thing for you is to induce the labor, because it takes days to prepare. So the safest thing for you, if you're having some kind of like really high blood pressure or whatever, and there's some kind of danger, they would induce the labor. They wouldn't, inject the baby with a needle and make it, you know, and to kill it like a lethal injection, like you would a criminal, and then it's dead, and you carry it for a few days while they get your cervix and everything prepared to deliver the dead baby. That's, you know. So if you're in a medical emergency, that they'll just actually deliver the baby. But another thing to consider, though, is that when people say like the government has no business being in abortion or dictating and stuff like that, the purpose of our government, if you go back to the Declaration of Independence, it says that we're endowed, you know, with certain unalienable rights. What are those rights? Kamala Harris skipped this one, but one of them is life, right? If we don't have the right to life, all the other rights are kind of irrelevant because you can't have that without the right to life. And you can consider the right to life just the right to not die. I mean, right to not be killed, rather, because you don't have the right to not die. You're going to die one day. We're all mortal beings. We're going to get sick, and etc. Blah blah blah. But we do have the right to not be killed. That's really what the right to life is. That someone cannot take that from you, go and kill you. And if you do, if someone murders you, that they're going to be arrested, they're going to be tried, and all that's going to have due process and face justice. That's what's going to happen. They'll see if it's like self-defense, that's differently. Maybe they'll get off or whatever. But there's got to be a whole process because you're a human being, you have value and you have rights, and someone violated those rights. So the purpose of government, of why we form governments, is to ensure those rights, those unalienable rights. And if I say God-given rights, we were like, well, God, like that's literally in the Constitution. If you just want to think of them as natural rights or negative rights, you can think of it that way. But the purpose of government is to ensure those rights. That's the purpose of it. So if the government isn't doing that, they're kind of not meeting their end of the bargain. So people just think about like the abortion debate as you're having a conversation with someone and they're about, oh, you're taking away my liberty, my rights, etc. Blah, blah. But what you're telling the government is that the child in your womb doesn't have a right to be protected against violence. And if your idea is like, well, my bodily autonomy is what gets to dictate whether they are protected from violence or not. Gosh, did we not just live through the pandemic? I just think it's too much kind of power. I think it's a really slippery slope to tell the government that your babies in your womb don't have no right to be protected against violence if they don't have the right to life. So I think the government not protecting the unborn is actually violating their rights. The abortion is an act of aggression. People say, oh, you forced birthers or whatever. Like if I do nothing and you do nothing and you're pregnant, you know what's going to happen? You're going to have a baby in 9 months. Right? That is a natural progression. So I can't force something that's going to naturally happen that's in progress. Once the baby is made, it can't be unmade. It doesn't unexist. It's either going to live or die. That's just how it is. That's how life is, right? That's just, you're not upset with me, you're upset with nature. That's, or God or whoever, but I can't force anything to happen. When people say you're forcing women to have their pregnancy or whatever, they're saying you're stopping them from committing violence. Am I forcing you to not kill your neighbor if that's what you want to do? So to me, there's like some really hysterical kind of language when people say stuff like that. But I believe that like really we should be going for like equal protection and stuff. I know because the Roe v. Wade was overturned, we're going state by state and advocating and stuff. I don't know if there's going to be anything else from a federal level, but we all know. Not everybody knows, I guess, but it is a fact that life starts at conception. Even Christopher Hitchens, he's a very famous atheist, said that feminists have a contempt for science because they don't want to accept that. There's nowhere else for life to begin. Like life is a continuum that starts at conception. So when you have people like Warnock, or you have people like the congresswoman there saying, oh, we shouldn't be dictating, what happens with a woman's body. That's not even true. They don't believe that. They didn't believe that during COVID. They don't believe that. Well, I guess the most extreme example is like, you obviously believe that the government should stop someone else from murdering someone else, using their body to harm someone else, right? So we do have your bodily autonomy isn't absolute in the sense that you don't get to just impede upon someone else's liberties, right? So that's where the debate comes in. I acknowledge that you have the woman's right to her bodily autonomy, hitting up against the baby's right to life, and they have bodily autonomy, right? They're not conscious enough to exercise and advocate for it, but they do at least have the right to life. So how do we maximize the most liberty? Well, obviously, if both of them can live, it would be good for them to both live. And people say, well, it's, some people don't even think that if a woman has an abortion that she's actually even, especially if she has a pill, it's just her denying the baby the natural resources. I hear that a lot. It's addressed in the book and stuff. But women aren't willing themselves to have abortions. The pill is like they're taking something that's created for that purpose to do that. So they is it really that different from having the forceps and other stuff? They're not willing themselves to happen. Their body isn't naturally cutting off those nutrients. So they're saying it's healthcare, but healthcare isn't a right. It is a commodity, especially in the United States or whatever. So they're getting these tools and these resources from outside forces to try to have this outcome. So to pretend like it's not some kind of active aggression, some kind of active force, just really isn't true. So, yeah. So, I'm going to play this clip of Stacey Abrams before I go into like the breakdown of the book.
We live in a state that right now has decided to take cruelty to a new level. I am the daughter of 2 pastors. I have a strong moral core. I was trained to read and understand the Bible, and I will tell you this: there is nothing about the decision to eliminate access to abortion care that is grounded in anything other than cruelty and meanness and danger in the state of Georgia. Nothing. Abortion care is a medical issue. It is a medical decision, and in the state of Georgia, it is a dangerous one. Brian Kemp, and yes, I'm going to call his name, is a hard-right religious extremist who has decided that he knows better than any woman about her body and has decided to make women second-class citizens in the state of Georgia in the year of our Lord, 2022.
So this idea that it's just rooted in meanness and whatever, I'm so glad she lost twice. But she hasn't ruled out losing again someday. But why, I don't understand why people can't just believe that people legitimately don't want the unborn to be killed. I don't understand that. Why people can't just accept that. But if you belittle your enemy, and I guess it's a good way to try to make it seem like, well, if they're the bad guy, then I guess you can uplift yourself as a bit more virtuous. But one thing that the book really does go into and break down is that if you are a Christian, again, it should be like totally against your nature to think that this is a good thing. Whether it's the design of the family, trusting into God's plan, crucifying your own ego, the value of suffering. The idea of abortion for a lot of people, it's to weed out suffering, to breed out suffering. Eugenics, the idea is to breed out suffering. So you hear that all the time. Someone in the comments mentioned that people bring up foster care all the time. It's like, but you don't think we should go around? Well, first of all, the foster care thing, if you have some kind of adoption plan and stuff, like your kid's not going to go into foster care. There's so many people waiting to adopt that it's not likely to happen. And the foster care system is about reunification. Like there will be kids who are taken away from the parents or something. Maybe there's drug abuse or something. I don't know. For whatever reason, the kids got taken away from the families. But the goal is reunification. It's very hard to adopt out of like foster care. And so, but you can, but like people say, there's 400,000 kids in foster care. Yeah. And not a huge chunk of those kids, you cannot adopt. Not just saying you can't foster and do other things with the kids, but people bring up, foster care and adoption and stuff. They're not quite the same. And if you have a baby, it is very likely that your baby will immediately find a home. There are parents waiting. Like people say, like, oh, kids shouldn't come into this world unwanted. No one is really unwanted. You just have to give people a chance for their hearts to connect. Like there's a pair of open arms somewhere. So it's a really bad talking point. So a lot of people don't even know enough or care enough about like foster kids and stuff to know that's a really bad argument. But it also, like, you're also saying that it'd be better off if these people were dead than to be killed, not just not exist, because abortion is like someone killing you off. So it'd be better if these kids were killed off than to end up in foster care. And some people are like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm like, that's really messed up. So why is this? What I don't understand is, why is like potential suffering a good enough excuse to kill someone in the womb, but they wouldn't advocate for that outside of the womb, like a guarantee, even though that they know someone is guaranteed and has suffered. That doesn't, they don't carry that same kind of animosity or violence over, right? So it's just really an excuse. So I also mentioned earlier, like, the idea of self-sacrifice and justice, you know. So the decisions that you make, why should you be taking them out on someone else? So there's so many things about your Christianity that should not allow you to get to that point where you support this thing. And so to the people who are like, well, I wouldn't do it, but I think that other people should be allowed to do that. How often do you say, well, and advocate for, like, well, I'm, you know, against, like, I wouldn't, you know, commit like violent acts, sexual acts against this person, but I think other people should be able to do that. You wouldn't say things like that. Like, and we are talking about an act of violence that ends in death. So if you're advocating for something, why are you going out of your way to stand up and advocate for something and allow something that is genuinely evil? Especially when such a large portion, like 95% of the time when people opt for abortion, it's for some kind, people hate this word, but it's convenience. And I don't mean convenience in the sense that it was an easy decision to make, you know, that it didn't take time, et cetera, blah, 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 or something that people enjoyed. But I just mean that it's something that didn't need to happen, you know? Before I go into like just the breakdown all the way, I do want to highlight a particular section of the book. Because I think it's really important to not only talk about biology and the theology and stuff, but also for people who may not subscribe to that stuff. I mentioned earlier, like, how someone one time was like, you seem to have this idea that all life is intrinsically valuable. Is that because you're religious? And I'm like, what the heck? But even if you really like instinctively don't believe that all life is intrinsically valuable, I think there's really value in pretending that it is, or at least acting like it. So I'm gonna go ahead and just read a little bit of the book. Okay. I was once told by an atheist, it seems as though you are under the impression that all humans possess intrinsic value. Does that opinion come from religion? I've also seen pro-life activists convert to being pro-choice after concluding intrinsic value cannot be argued without religion. Intrinsic value means we possess value naturally simply for being. As a Christian, I do not believe human beings possess intrinsic value. As a Christian, I do believe human beings possess intrinsic value. We are made in the image of God, and it is indisputable that He has a purpose, a plan for all human beings, even before we are formed in the womb. But if you're a non-religious person who believes we're all meat sacks who will live, die, and then no longer exist, perhaps it's difficult to believe in the bigger meaning of it all. It still shouldn't matter. Even if you don't believe in the intrinsic value, it's in everyone's best interest to pretend that we do. If we don't simply possess value for being human, that means our value has to be earned or someone has to grant it. Who has such power, and why should they possess such authority to grant it? It wasn't too long ago that slaves were thought of as less valuable, even though they were human. It's not as though legislators crafting the Constitution didn't acknowledge they had value other than monetary. The Southern states valued slaves enough to want them counted in their population numbers to grant them an advantage over the Northern states. The North could not allow that to happen. They bargained and ended up with a 3/5 compromise. Was it moral to acknowledge a human being enough for your political advantage, yet deny them enough humanity to free them from their bonds of enslavement? Most today would think not, but back then it was just good business. In the Zong trial of 1783, the court had to decide whether throwing at least 142 African slaves overboard in an attempt to save the crew during a storm would be covered by insurance. These were human beings, but it was argued they were cargo It was the same as if horses had been thrown overboard. This trial helped to highlight the inhumanity of the slave trade and fueled abolitionists to end it. The insurance companies were not ordered to recoup the losses, but those responsible for the massacre were never brought to justice. Justice John Lee, Great Britain's Solicitor General, didn't think it warranted criminal charges. What is this claim that human people have been thrown overboard? This is the case of chattels and goods. Blacks are goods and property. It is madness to accuse these well-serving, honorable men of murder. They acted out of necessity in the most appropriate manner for the cause. The late Captain Collingwood, acting in the interest of his ship to protect the safety of his crew, to question the judgment of an experienced, well-traveled captain held in the highest regard is one of folly, especially when talking of slaves. The case is the same as if wood had been thrown overboard. Today we view these statements as monstrous, but they sound awfully familiar to me. What is this claim that abortion takes a human life? This is a question of bodily autonomy. Fetuses are clumps of cells and the property of the mother until they reach viability. It is madness to accuse women of murder. They act out of necessity for what is best for their physical, mental, and emotional health. To question their judgment and their choice is wrong, especially when talking about a parasite. Treating a pregnancy is the same as treating a cancer. Every sentence in that paragraph is taken from multiple conversations with pro-choice activists, even equating pregnancy to cancer, which I've heard people say multiple times, by the way. Instinctively, we know that abortion is a terrible thing. Rationally, we know abortion is a terrible thing. But the horrible truth about humanity is we can rationalize our way into justifying insidious horrors and train others to be numb to them. If you've studied anything about fetuses, you know that they are not clumps of cells, no more than you and me. They're not the mother's body, and they don't have much in common with parasites. These regurgitated talking points exist to dehumanize the unborn. Abortion activists fight against mothers seeing sonograms. They claim they don't want to bother women who are already making difficult decisions. It's unconscionable that anyone wouldn't want to persuade a woman from changing her mind. Senator Elizabeth Warren even rallied against pregnancy crisis centers that help women in need. She's furious they outnumber abortion clinics 3-1 in her state. Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan has also come against them as well. She vetoed $3 million for pregnancy resource centers and $10 million for adoption promotion out of the 2023 budget. If you fight against informing women, offering them hope, and giving them options, it's not about protecting them. It's about protecting the business of abortion. And you could rationalize the need for it. Captain Collingwood could argue he did what he had to save his crew. If someone had to be sacrificed, why not the slaves? After all, abortion activists argue it's better to be dead than live a life of suffering anyway. Of course, the Zong was overpacked, and that contributed to the crew's predicament. Shouldn't the captain have at least been held accountable for the choices leading up to that horrible decision? Shouldn't women? Since more than 99% of abortions are enacted through consensual sex, asking how did the baby get there will defeat a vast majority of bodily autonomy arguments. Nowadays, you'd likely hear consent to sex isn't consent to pregnancy, but the consent is at least implied. If you don't know procreation can lead to creation, you're certainly too young to have consensual sex. Besides, pregnancy isn't something you can willfully control. You can try to arrange it, but your consent doesn't guarantee fertilization and implantation. You either are or you aren't pregnant. Announcing your child who cannot respond, doesn't have your permission to live, doesn't do anything but make you feel better. But society certainly has no obligation to consent to participating or allowing the killing of that child. There are millions of reasons for society to reject abortion on demand, and each one has their own distinctive set of DNA. Some activists argue it doesn't matter and will go further beyond bodily autonomy. They'll argue the mother isn't even technically killing a fetus if she takes an abortion pill. She's simply denying resources and the fetus is dying due to a lack of development. This logic would be the equivalent of Captain Collingwood throwing a slave to the mercy of the ocean and claiming the lack of body temperature regulation, stamina, and skill killed them. After all, viability is your ability to survive in your environment. Can women take an abortion pill intending on the result of being a dead embryo or fetus, have the intended effect, and then not be culpable for the action? no honest person can believe that, but guilty minds can delude themselves into the most glorious falsehoods. Anything is on the table when you permit yourself to another person and openly discriminate against them. We'd like to believe killing another human being is difficult, call them a savage like they did the Native Americans, property like they did the slaves, and rats like they did the Jews. It makes atrocities more palatable. In Dred Scott versus Sanford, it was argued when the Declaration of Independence said all men are created equal, they weren't talking about the Negro. They said it is too clear for dispute that the enslaved African race were not intended to be included, and they believed other laws, particularly dealing with interracial marriage and mixed children, had proven a perpetual and impassable barrier was intended to be erected between the white race and the one which they had reduced to slavery. The court decided American citizenship didn't apply to anyone of African descent, whether you were free or not. Dred Scott has been panned as the worst decision the court has ever made. It was overwritten by the 13th and 14th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. It's unfathomable that we could have treated other human beings so poorly back then, but it was just as evil in the 1800s to anyone willing to open their eyes and see. Frederick Douglass addressed some of the inconsistencies in his speech, What to the Slave is the 4th of July, written in 1852. Must I undertake to prove that a slave is a man? That point is conceded already. Nobody doubts it. The slaveholders themselves acknowledge it in the enactment of the laws for their government. It is already a conceded scientific point that the origin of unique human life begins at conception, yet our laws are inconsistent. Why does it make sense that if a pregnant woman were driving to an abortion clinic and was killed by a drunk driver, he would be charged with vehicular manslaughter for killing two people? As President Ronald Reagan pointed out, why does it make sense that the law will respect property rights of a fetus if a father writes a will to his unborn child, yet the mother can rob the beneficiary of their life? Does anyone doubt Scott Peterson should have been convicted for the murder of his wife and unborn son? Does anyone doubt that Remy Lee's 6-week fetus deserved justice after her ex-boyfriend tricked her into taking abortion pills to kill their baby? The death penalty is being sought for Hunter James Tatum for shooting his wife, who was 6 months pregnant, in the head. The doctors performed an emergency delivery, but baby Everett did not survive. I have never had a conversation with an abortion advocate who does not believe the violent aggressors in cases like these should be charged for the deaths of the unborn. Does not believe the violent aggressors in cases like these should be charged for the deaths of the unborn. But if baby Everett was aborted on the last day of the 5th month, they would claim he wouldn't be alive because baby Everett was not viable or sentient and was his mother's right to dismember him. How can what happened to Remy Lee be a grave injustice or miscarriage be a great tragedy, while any other woman who chooses an early abortion is exercising freedom? It is the pro-life position that a mother and her child are both equally valuable, worthy of dignity, and have a right to not be killed. Pro-choice activists argue only the woman is relevant, and they'll base that belief around the baby's vulnerability. They can't survive outside the womb, they're not sentient, they're not conscious, etc. The fetus can't think for itself or comprehend, therefore it's permissible for them to be aborted. But why doesn't this make women more accountable? She could comprehend her actions, and they resulted in a baby. If all her life decisions had led her to a place where taking the life of a blameless child is the best option, she's drastically failed. The majority of women who have abortions are adults, not hapless teenagers who made an oopsie. Why not prioritize the new child who is virtually a blank slate? Again, this is not the pro-life position. It is not my position. But when you get to pick and choose who is valuable, why choose the woman conspiring to commit homicide? If it truly is based on a child vulnerability, why logic wouldn't extend outside of the womb? Euthanasia could be the next craze, voluntarily or not. Canada has euthanasia, and it is becoming a human rights concern. Roger Foley, a man with a degenerative brain disorder, was so alarmed when the doctors brought up euthanasia that he began recording them. The hospital's director of ethics said that it would cost north of $1,500 a day to treat him. Foley said he felt like he was being coerced. Other patients in a country with free health care are considering being killed because of medical bills. In Ontario, medical authorities explicitly instruct doctors not to indicate on death certificates if people died from euthanasia. According to the Canadian government, 3.3% of their deaths are from medical assistance in dying. If vulnerability disqualifies you from intrinsic value, why have social safety nets funded by taxpayers? Taxed income is acquired by labor produced with their bodies. How is it not violation of bodily autonomy? And why is it so many people feel we have a moral obligation to strangers outside of the womb, but parents have no moral obligation to their child in the womb? And if parents deserve the choice of parental obligation, why are men forced to pay child support if they are born? He doesn't have a say in whether they are born, yet we're satisfied making men pay even at that threat of jail, because it's in the best interest of the vulnerable child. It is no question the unborn are alive. Whether you value that life is completely subjective, which remains true in and out of the womb. If you disqualify the unborn from life, you do so with the foreknowledge of what they lack for the purpose of actively discriminating against them. Would you justify taking the life of anyone outside of the womb based on their size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency? Otherwise known as SLED, these humans are treated as though they are the woman's property instead of beings worthy of dignity and moral consideration. Frederick Douglass probably hoped we'd move beyond this sort of archaic thinking, yet here we are again. Perhaps you can never get to the point of seeing no difference between an unborn baby and a newborn. Perhaps you can't bring yourself to care in general. It's still in everyone's best interest to pretend or at least act as if they do. If you can justify or allow the discrimination of an unborn child in order to deny them the basic human rights, the right to not be killed, someone can do the same to you, just as we've done to others. Christians believe humans possess intrinsic value, but let's be honest, we don't always act like it. We can be unkind, petty, and spiteful to one another. We can be like Jonah and wish for swift judgment rather than mercy. We can wish for tit for tat like the Israelites, lamenting to God, praying for revenge against Babylon. We can be too selfish or even too lazy to remember to pray for our neighbors and strangers. I'm an introvert. Being around people is not my desire. But Christians have to crucify their flesh and pray for a burden for the lost. Paul wanted his Jewish brothers and sisters to receive the gospel so desperately, he was willing to give up his salvation for them. That is an extraordinary love and dedication to the cause, but I have not observed much of that devotion in modern Christianity, especially in the West. While Christians in communist and Muslim countries suffer daily persecution and threats of death, American Christians are too afraid to pick up the phone and invite a friend to church. Human life is intrinsically valuable, but our value of human life is fickle. It takes discipline. If it were natural to love thy neighbor as thyself, Jesus would not have needed to command it. Life itself is also intrinsically valuable. Pro-choice activists argue it's acceptable to terminate the life of an embryo or fetus because they are not sentient. To that I ask, what does it matter? If someone kills you, you won't be sentient either. The response is normally, there's a difference. The fetus never knew it was alive. It doesn't matter. Once you are dead, you don't feel one way or another about it. Is the awareness of your death what makes murder immoral? If a serial killer made it quick, painless, and without your knowledge, we would still charge them for murder. We'd still seek justice for your life. Your friends and family would probably be in the courtroom to hear the conviction. Is it sadder because the people you leave behind would mourn you? If acknowledging your life and grieving your absence is what makes your death tragic, it makes the pro-life cause more important. We are told to mind our business, but mourning and reflection are how we reverence one's existence. To not speak and not care about the millions of children slain in abortion would allow them to fade into obscurity, leaving the door open for more gruesome deaths. Why do you think we repeat lines like never again when talking about the Holocaust? It is not only to remember the people who died, but to reflect on how an evil was committed and to prevent such atrocities from happening again. John Farmer Jr., the director of Eagleton Institute of Politics, said, "Because never again is a profession of faith as much as it is a statement of policy, like the plea for universal peace at the close of a Kaddish. It is a prayer like invocation and as yet unrealized world, a world in which humanity's moral progress will someday match its military prowess." You may argue abortion is not the same because a fetus doesn't experience life, and that doesn't hold true either. Would you dare accuse a woman grieving for her miscarriage of being irrational? No, you would probably offer her condolences. Even if you view a fetus as a potential life rather than a life with potential, you still sympathize with that loss. When my cousin lost her newborn, it wasn't less sad because her daughter never got to live her life. It was more tragic because she barely lived. When a parent loses a young child, it haunts them. The younger you are, even if you're a young adult, the guest at the funeral will say they were gone too soon. When someone has lived a full and long life, we still mourn, but we're at a greater peace. My grandmother on my mother's side passed away at 102, completely content. I miss hearing her voice and seeing her smile, but I'm not sad a God-loving woman passed on. When a father and a soldier is killed in the line of duty, we think of how he'll never be able to walk his daughter down the aisle. When a mother passes, we lament about how she won't be able to send her children off to the prom or see them graduate. We talk about dreams they didn't get to fulfill and journeys they didn't make. We don't simply grieve the dead, we grieve for the lost opportunities. Funerals are often a time families and friends are stirred to go make the most out of life, or at the very least reach out to loved ones they've neglected. We make adjustments because we don't want to leave this world without feeling like we made the most of what we've been given. Abortion is not immoral simply because that individual had intrinsic value. Abortion is immoral because life itself is intrinsically valuable. Pro-choice activists will justify abortion in the interest of sparing a child from potential suffering and trauma. Why would you want a child to grow up in a family that doesn't want them, and so on? But I can never quite get an estimate on how much suffering is appropriate before it's justifiable to kill someone. Who made that scale and where is it located? No one is advocating we solve the massive homeless problem in California via mass execution or that we put foster care kids out of their misery. Even if someone chooses to take their own life, they will end up in a hospital on suicide watch if they survive. We value life so much, we don't grant blanket authority to end it. If someone even encourages suicide, they'll be kicked from major social media platforms. Perhaps we will one day become like Futurama with suicide booths, but we're not that far gone yet. If guaranteed suffering isn't a good enough reason to kill another human being, why is hypothetical or potential suffering adequate justification to end the life of a child in the womb? If you're an atheist, you can take the approach that we're all primordial soup and nothing truly matters, or you can believe everything matters because this life is all we have. The quality of our lives and how much we appreciate it may vary, but there is value in life itself. If we didn't believe that, would we bother spending our lives in the grand pursuit of meaning? You may find meaning, you may lose it, regain it, and never quite receive the answer you're looking for. There's still value in the search, the relationships we forge, the struggles that make us, the defeats we learn from, and the triumphs we savor. Life is worth living if we have the courage to explore its terror and its beauty. And so that's that's the section in the book about intrinsic value. That is in the chapter about the necessity of moral absolutes. So I forgot it was that long. It was that long. But I wanted to read that part about the Zong, and I wanted to get to that part about the end because people argue that, you know, like no harm has been done if you abort a fetus, but I don't believe that's true. I don't believe that's true. Even if they don't get to, they can't experience it themselves. There's something wrong about just robbing that human being of that chance to experience their life, period. So, I said I would explain what's all in it. So I'm just going to quickly go through like what to expect if you get it. Again, it's available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and stuff. It's good if you go out and get it today, get it this weekend and stuff. So it starts off with need to know definitions, because I hate when people are like, it's not a baby. Excuse me. Or they'll say it's not a child. So I have definitions right there. It is a child, it is a baby. A fetus is an unborn human baby. A child is a son or daughter of any age. So all those terms apply. And then I go through an introduction, and the introduction really explains that we're now at this point in time where you have pro-life people who are saying, hey, you need to respect life at conception, but you have all these activists who are pushing for basically no limitations now. And the reason for that is because they're the only really two honest positions. And I know people are like, we need nuance and we need some kind of compromise. The compromises don't make sense. Let's just be honest. Like, why is 15 weeks okay, but not 14 weeks and 6 days? Like, it's not, they don't make sense. It doesn't really. And even if you're like, well, something's not sentient yet, I'm like, but you know it will be. It has that inherent nature. So it's like you're trying to take them out before they're too big of a moral burden for you. So it's like the in-betweens don't really matter, but the only really two honest positions is you value life when it starts, or you totally value bodily autonomy and the woman gets to decide to have an abortion basically at any point. And right now you have about 10% of Americans who agree with that, which is very disturbing, but that's where the activists are really pushing it. They don't want to say that. They'll just say it's a woman's choice or whatever. But we did have all those Democrats who voted not even to provide care for the children if they survive an abortion. So we're not in a good place. But if they want to keep the abortion business going, then they have to put in people's minds that it's not a necessary evil, that it's actually good. And you see people now saying that abortion is health. They say it's healthcare. They say abortion is love. They say it's self-care. Those are things that activists are saying right now. So then it goes into when life begins. And so it goes into the science of it. What biology actually says. And so it's really important. I think it's important because a majority of Americans, based on surveys and stuff, want to look at like biologists to kind of determine when that is. And they say that that's knowing when life begins is an important distinction of when they want these laws to be created, because they do believe that children should be protected at that point. But biologists, even though like 95% of them think that it starts at like conception and stuff, they don't want that on them. And they actually say that that's an argument for like theologians and philosophers. So then it goes into philosophy. It talks about personhood, bodily autonomy, positive, negative rights, do no harm, which originally do no harm actually included not giving an abortion. And so once it goes through those, kind of hitting those objection stuff that people say with bodily autonomy and personhood and stuff, which personhood is a philosophical concept as well, obviously. Then it goes into what the Bible actually says. So it talks about the origin of mankind. When does God, when are you valued as a human being? And then so chapter 1 is very long, but then it goes into a very important chapter afterwards, because a lot of people will say, Christina, like God kills. So what do you mean he's pro-life? Well, first of all, pro-life means that you're against abortion and euthanasia. So these words are very specific, have very specific meanings. But I think that's a really odd question if you really think about it, because you're like, are you God? Why are you comparing an all-powerful God, whether he's passing judgment and deciding he has the authority who lives and dies, he gives life, he takes life, is not the same as a mother deciding to take the life of one of his creation. So it's not even on the same level at all. But if you're so we've already covered like the science and other stuff like that. So now we're going into the theology. And if you're going to argue from the point of authority from the Christian perspective, the different denominations have different ideas on how much God is sovereign or how much he has his hands in the pot, but everyone agrees that his hands are in the pot. So it tackles God's sovereignty and that he has the right to take life, give life, etc. So it goes into that, God's judgment, God, killing and other things like that. It goes into events like the flood, the children of the firstborn in Egypt. Those things are covered in there. Though I will say there's a book of Is God a Moral Monster? It's really good, and I'd recommend people reading that to get like a deeper kind of knowledge on those particular things. But I did touch on it in the books. Because God did not just wake up and say, let's, wipe out humanity. There are particular reasons for it, etc. But so those things are addressed, but still they're not the same as the creator doing as he wills versus someone violating the laws against the creator for the abortion. So, and then it goes into how does God feel about abortion? And that's where we'll cover things like the abortion potion in Numbers 5, which is like not true all in the least, but that's a big section of the book, debunking a lot of objections that people have. Does God value your choice? God gives us free will. So some people say, well, God gives us free will. God does give us free will, but you wouldn't advocate for everyone to be allowed to do every single thing that their will desires, right? You wouldn't say that men, want to sexually assault women, so it's okay that they do. You wouldn't say that. So that, like, not all choices that women make are good. Not all choices women make are moral. Not all choices women make are legal or ought to be legal. So that's a really odd, bizarre kind of thought process, but it goes into that. But God values your free will so much and your choices so much that he will judge you according to what you do. Then it goes into how it's compatible with, is it compatible with Christianity at all? So it goes into like the structure of the family, trusting in God's plan. Like, how can you believe that it's okay to be like, well, the child's not gonna have a good life, etc. But there's all these people in the Bible who were counted last, who people were looked over. When David was going to be anointed as king, he wasn't even there in the room with his brothers. You had Samuel looking at other people. It was like, oh, must be this brother here. And God's like, no, I'm looking at the heart. You're looking at other things. So maybe other people wouldn't have picked you. That doesn't mean that God wouldn't pick you and that God doesn't have a plan and purpose for you. So you like automatically being like, wow, this life isn't gonna be good for my child, so let me go ahead and take their life. That's not a Christian perspective. Crucifying your ego, the value in suffering. There is value in suffering. The Bible does teach that. Self-sacrifice, how we should be self-sacrificing, judging, and I don't mean like judge not lest ye be judged. I do address that because people say that all the time, but like you judging and taking out your actions on this child. And then there's just the view of justice. So then it goes into separation of church and state, because people say it all the time. It goes into what it actually means. And then it goes into this idea of imposing one's belief on people, because everyone imposes their beliefs. The belief that the baby isn't alive, it's unscientific. But to believe that it's not worth protecting, or the woman should supersede the baby and stuff, those are all beliefs, and we are all like bringing our beliefs and ideas to the table, and then we have to battle like which one is better. But you are imposing a belief on someone. Being pro-choice is not a neutral stance. Sorry. And then it goes into the next chapter is about the exceptions, abortions in the case of sexual assault, and then medical complications like illness of the child, life of the mother, and also incest. So those things are covered in there. I could probably go deeper in like another book, but I did address it and pretty thoroughly in there. Then it goes into the absolutes chapter, the necessity of moral absolutes. So why we need objective morality, intrinsic value, which I read that whole section, and the societal harm of abortion. And then it goes into the healing of women, choosing redemption over condemnation. And then there's this really big section about how they know not what they do, and how society has really warped the brains of women to get them to this point to feel like they need abortion, and questions why they feel like they need it. Like, how did that begin, and how can we unwind that? And then it goes into like the role of Christians, how we need to be on offense, not defense. We should be happy about like the overturning Roe v. Wade, but we still have a lot of work to do, and how preaching the word will really help with that. And then a call for men to really step up. And then the conclusion is really, really good, really, really good. And then that's it. That's the book. So the whole thing is like 80,000 words, but that's including like the notes and stuff like that. So that's my baby. That's what I've labored over this whole entire time. I'm just looking through the comments really quickly. Thank you guys for being in the live and for talking and communicating and being interested in the book. So yeah, again, this is what it looks like in the print version. You guys can get it print, but you can get it on ebooks right now. It's available on Amazon. It's available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. So very excited. My baby sister did do the artwork here for the hand of God reaching out to the baby here. She did such an amazing job. And her website, I did put her website in there at the back of the book if anyone's interested in her doing any work and stuff. But Tina pops in the lives from time to time, and Tina's Sex Portraits, you can find her. She did such an amazing job. So yeah, this was a really big labor of love. I do believe abortion is a terrible, awful, horrible thing. But one thing that I interviewed someone who had an abortion and told their story. They took the abortion pill and it didn't like work what it's supposed to work, and it happened like when she was at school, and she had like this awful, terrible experience. But she eventually came to Christ, and she came to, at first she was like really like pro-choice, etc., blah blah blah. A lot of women harden their hearts after something like that, or a lot of women have hardened hearts because they know so many women that they love that have gone through this. But a lot of people who are pro-life are former pro-choice people. So but she came to Christ, and she ended up realizing that the blood of Christ covers everything, you know. And if she couldn't forgive herself for that, that's like saying Jesus' blood wasn't enough on the cross. So I don't, if you did have an abortion, my goal is really not to condemn you to hell. That's not what I want. But I do believe that just like if I have sinned, other people have sinned, that they repent for their sin and God forgives them, that this is a thing that America really needs to repent from and then make it illegal. I do believe in a ban. But I don't want people to carry those scars and those wounds forever. And they don't have to. And I do strongly believe that women can be redeemed. There's a verse that I started this book with that was so good from Apostle Paul. Because some people read Apostle Paul and they think he's so mean with his letters. But he said, "For I wrote to you out of much affliction and anguish of heart and with many tears, not to cause you pain, but to let you know the abundant love that I have for you." So I want that in mind when people read through this, especially if you did have an abortion, that I didn't write this to condemn you to hell. I didn't write this because I hate you or anything like that. But I do want abortion to end. And I believe that a lot of women, they don't have even true informed consent. There's so many women who don't know anything about the biology. It was amazing how many people believed that when there was propaganda going around that a 9-week baby is like just exploded tissue or whatever in a petri dish. I'm like, it doesn't even look like a baby. It's just, I'm like, that's because you sucked it up through like a vacuum. Like, how did it get in the petri dish, bruh? It's not in a womb. And but there are even pro-choice women who are like, I had a miscarriage or whatever. Like, that's not what a baby looks like. But people kept spreading it all over the place as if pro-life people were spreading propaganda. This video, no doubt, I don't know if it has it right now, but if you're watching on YouTube, at some point there will be a little thing like a disclaimer about abortion, and it's like, go to NIH or whatever to learn. And if you click on it and you read it, it'll say something along the lines of an abortion is a procedure to end a pregnancy or whatever. And what does that even mean? Like, if you have a C-section, that is a procedure that ends your pregnancy. But the baby obviously survived. Well, hopefully and mostly survives during that process. The abortion, if you have an induced abortion, the intent is to have a dead baby after that. But they don't even say that in the correction of the misinformation for people talking about abortion. So we're at a very dark, odd place where people are really trying to control the narrative in a direction of a place where more people are killed. In the United States of America, and I don't know where everyone is watching, but we have about 1 million abortions a year, induced abortions. So those are deliberate. And and a lot of people will say that, well, women, I don't want to judge them because they have like these rough circumstances, etc. I'm like, everyone does have rough circumstances, but we do have to ask ourselves as a nation, as a world, like, is death here the best option? And why do we feel so comfortable running to that as the solution, or suggest, or protecting it? Even if you are pro-choice and you decided to sit through and listen to all this, I really appreciate that. But if you are pro-choice, how much time do you devote to the other options, to not choosing abortion? And you may say, well, there's a lot of pro-life people out there that's advocating for the abolition of it. That's true. But not all decisions you weigh equally. Some things are worse than others. If I have no money and I need money, I could go out and get a job, or I could rob you. I'm pretty sure that you'd probably prefer one to another, right? So I have choices, but not all the choices I make might be moral or might be right. And some choices I may choose may harm someone else and inflict it on their liberties. But you could argue those are my choices to make. I have free will. I could choose those choices. But that doesn't mean that it should be legal for me to bust you over with a Glock and take your stuff. Right? So, you could say, well, she has all these economic problems and issues that got her to this point. That's true, but there's still other options that I could choose. One that doesn't involve violence and overstepping your liberties. So that's the debate. That's the question. If you are a pro-life person, you are a religious person, I don't think you should be arguing like I'm pro-life because it will make baby Jesus cry like that. And I haven't heard anyone say that. That's an exaggeration, but you should be able to look at your views and what sort of things, morals and principles that the Bible stands for. And if you want to take that route to be like, well, I'm you could say I'm not Catholic, but you could say I'm Catholic or I'm Pentecostal or whatever. I'm Pentecostal, but these are the things that, we believe. I believe that life is intrinsically valuable, that, we all, we should value life, and I believe it's objectively wrong. And then you make that case, right? And you defend those points. So you can still defend the gospel and, argue against abortion, because we are all battling ideas and what is wrong, what is right, what is moral. So you could just dismiss it and be like, I don't want to talk religion. But at the back of their heads, a lot of people will be like, you're just a religious nut anyway. They'll even accuse atheists of being Christian or secretly Christian or whatever. Like, it's just a shtick because they can't imagine like some other perspective. So go ahead and defend the gospel and defend the unborn. So pick your battles, but be armed. So that was one of the reasons that I made this. So again, I hope you guys go out and buy it. Thank you guys for listening. I'm very excited about it. So go ahead and get it. So thank you again. And I'll pull this up on screen again. I have other books that I've written. This is my 16th book. So this is a picture of me, all my other books. Most of my books are fiction. I do have one other nonfiction book. That's a faith book. Slay Your Fear, How to Overcome a Spirit of Fear. So, but this is my 16th book and I'm very, very proud of it. So, hope you guys enjoy. I hope it changes lives. I hope it changes your life. Get it for someone get it for yourself, for someone someone who needs to read it, someone who needs to reassess their Christian walk but you don't have to be a Christian and read this book. But it does have there's a lot of it that has a lot of theology in it. So thank you and happy reading. God bless.